My family doesn't age like other people. My grandmother was 98 when she passed, but she looked 65, maybe younger. My great uncle is 102 and still chops his own firewood. We've always credited it to good genes and our one sacred tradition, the Renewal Stew, served at every major family gathering. It was a rich, dark, savory stew that made you feel warm from the inside out, full of life. When Grandma Rose died, I was the one who inherited the old family farmhouse. Tucked away in her study, I finally found it, the original handwritten recipe book, bound in cracked leather. I felt a thrill, like I was finally being let in on the secret. I opened it to the page for the Renewal Stew. It was mostly blank. There were no ingredients listed for the stew itself. Only two cryptic notes in my great-great-grandmother's spidery script. For the broth, see the cellar instructions. For the seasoning, see the attic instructions. The cellar was damp and smelled of earth. Behind a stack of old canning jars, I found a loose stone in the wall. Pulling it free revealed a dark, hidden chamber. Inside, arranged in neat rows, were a dozen large, unglazed clay pots filled with a dark, peaty soil. A thick, pale, gnarled root snaked out of the soil in each pot, looking disturbingly like a human hand. A dusty journal sat on a small table. The entries, dating back to the 1800s, describe the process. When a member of our family dies, they aren't buried or cremated, they are planted. Their bodies are prepared with a special mixture of herbs and laid to rest in these pots. Over the years, the soil and the body produce a life root. This root is harvested, boiled for 3 days, and becomes the broth for the Renewal Stew. I felt a wave of nausea. We weren't just eating stew. We were consuming the concentrated essence of our dead ancestors. Shaking, I went to the attic. In a locked trunk, I found a collection of small, ornate silver boxes, each engraved with the name of a living family member. I found my own, my name freshly engraved. Inside each box was a small, sharp obsidian knife. Another journal explained the final step, the seasoning. It wasn't a spice. At each gathering, every family member present must make a living contribution to the stew. A few drops of blood, a sliver of fingernail, a tear cried directly into the pot. This offering of the living is what awakens the ancestral broth. I slammed the book shut, my hands trembling. It was a grotesque, cannibalistic ritual. I vowed I would never participate. The next major gathering was for the autumn equinox. I made an excuse not to go, claiming I had the flu. I felt a sense of righteous defiance. A week later, my mother called, her voice thin and weak. "Your Aunt Carol isn't doing well," she said. "She's had a sudden decline." I drove to my aunt's house. The woman who opened the door was a stranger. She looked 80 years old, her skin thin and translucent like parchment, her hair patchy and white. But it was Aunt Carol. She was only 58. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, hungry light. "You didn't come," she rasped, her hand gripping my arm with surprising strength. Her fingernails were cracked and yellow. "The stew, it wasn't strong enough. It's always weaker when someone is missing." I finally understood. We don't have good genes. We have a curse. A rapid, horrifying decay that is constantly trying to claim us. The stew isn't a fountain of youth. It's the only thing that holds the rot at bay. We aren't living long lives. We are desperately, grotesquely staving off an accelerated death. The winter solstice is next month. My mother called again yesterday. She told me my great-uncle's hands are so stiff he can no longer hold an axe. She told me she found a new gray hair, and when she plucked it, a small patch of skin came with it. Then she asked if I would be coming home for the solstice. Her voice was casual, but the question hung in the air, heavy and raw. They need me. They need my contribution. I'm looking at the small silver box with my name on it. The little black knife sits inside, cold and sharp. I have a choice. I can go, participate in this stomach-churning ritual, and feed the curse to keep my family looking young and vibrant, while I know the horrifying truth. Or I can stay here, clean and pure, and watch them all fall apart, knowing that the same rot is flowing through my own veins, waiting for its turn.
I have only ever told this story to very close friends of mine who I trust won't take me to Grippy Sock Jail, the psychiatric hospital, because even I have trouble accepting that this was an experience I had. I grew up going back and forth from my mom's house in Dayton, Ohio, to my dad's house in Waynesville, Ohio. Waynesville is, allegedly, the haunted capital of the Midwest, and considering the multiple supernatural experiences I had at both my dad and grandmother's houses, I feel confident that they are correct. My dad's house, which he shared with my uncle and baby cousin, was incredibly old, with dark wood paneling, ramshackle wooden floors that creaked with every step, old-school doorknobs with the keyhole locks, and dimmer switches in every room that they had put in sometime during the 90s. One day, when I was about 8 years old, my mother dropped me off at my dad's house for the weekend before she headed to work. I was a tomboy most of my childhood, so I practically lived outside in the dirt, and that day was no different. As was my routine, I dropped my backpack on the floor, ran upstairs to change out of my school clothes, and went to the backyard. The only thing that sucked about going to my dad's was that we weren't very close and there were no other kids on my block, so most of the time I had to play by myself. My favorite backyard activity was making potions out of mud, water, and assorted weeds or rocks that I would find on the ground. While I was making my potion and humming to myself, I started to feel like I was being watched. When I looked up, there was a boy about my age standing on the other side of the fence. He was tan, with bright blue eyes and dirty blonde hair, dressed in shorts and a striped red and blue t-shirt. He didn't seem mean, but I can remember I was a little creeped out that he was just standing there, fingers laced through the chain link, watching me intently. My creeps dissipated after a few minutes, though, because they were replaced with excitement that I might be able to make a friend. I waved at him, and he gave a shy wave back. I got up from my spot in the dirt and walked over to the fence. "Oh, what's your name?" I asked, excitedly. He took a few seconds before he replied with a very soft Robert, but I go by Robby. I asked him if he just moved in because I remembered seeing a U-Haul truck parked in front of the house next door the weekend before. "Yeah, I moved here with my mom," he said. My excitement grew. I would no longer have to spend my time at my dad's alone. "Do you want to come play over here?" I asked. "Sure," he replied meekly, cracking a small half-smile. I met him at my gate, let him in, and we spent the rest of the day making potions and mud pies, catching bugs, talking about school, and making weird noises to make each other laugh. When the sun was setting behind the trees, my dad called for me to come in and wash up for dinner. I said goodbye to my new friend and went inside for the night. From then on, Robby and I had a routine. Every weekend, I would get dropped off at Dad's house, and every day like clockwork, he would be standing at my back gate waiting for me to come let him in. He never went in my yard without me meeting him there, and I figured it was just because he was polite. We would play and talk and laugh for hours, until inevitably, my dad would call for me to come in for dinner. I began to notice some things about Robby. He always seemed wet, which I assumed meant he had just been outside running around a lot and working up a sweat. I also never met his mom. She never called for him to come in to dinner like my dad did, and I never saw her face poking through the curtains to check on him the way my dad and uncle would do, although sometimes I would see her getting in her car to go somewhere. And although he was clearly having fun when we were together, he was always very quiet, even when he laughed. almost as if the loudest he could physically speak was a whisper. None of this ever bothered me enough to ask him about, though, because I was just glad I had a real friend, maybe even a best friend. We went on like this for months, well into the summer. It got to the point where every Friday I was impatiently counting down the hours until I got dropped off so I could go play with Robby. Then, one Friday evening, I ran out to my backyard to find that Robby was not standing at my back gate. I was confused, to say the least. I had gotten so used to seeing him standing there, waiting patiently for me to let him into the yard with his fingers twisted up in the chain link. After sitting and waiting on my steps for him for almost an hour, I decided I would go next door and get him. I walked up the front stairs to his house, opened the screen door, and knocked. After a couple of minutes with no answer, I knocked again. His mom's car was parked on the street, so I knew they had to be home. After several more minutes, I decided to knock one more time, as hard as I could. Maybe they couldn't hear me the first time. I finally heard the lock twist and the door open just a crack. Robby's mom stood in the crack, poking her head just far enough through that I could see her face. Her hair disheveled, large purple circles set deep in nearly translucent skin. She peered down at me with confusion. She said nothing, just looked at me as if she were waiting for me to speak. "Hi," I said. "Hello? Can I help you?" she said, still a confused expression on her face. I was wondering if Robby could come out and play. "I haven't seen him today," I said excitedly. The confused expression on her face rearranged into that of horror followed by anger. She gripped the edge of the door till her knuckles turned white. "Get away from this house and don't you ever come knocking on my door again." Her voice shook. She shut the door hard, and now my face was the one twisted in confusion. I walked back to my house, wondering why she was so mad. Maybe Robby has gotten in trouble and his mom was in a bad mood. The next morning, I heard a knock downstairs and ran to my window to see who it was. It was Robby's mom. My dad answered the door and I heard them talking intensely about something. 15 minutes later, I watched her walk back over to her house and heard my dad walking up the stairs toward my room. He came in and asked if he could talk to me. We sat on my bed. Staring at him, I wondered why he seemed so disturbed. My dad was not a very nice man, and we had barely anything in common, but the way he was acting was somehow more awkward and uncomfortable than usual. "You know that lady that lives next door?" he asked me. Yeah, I replied. "That's Robby's mom?" He pinched the bridge of his nose and took a deep breath. I started to worry. I'm not sure how to say this or how you know his name, but Robert passed away about 3 years ago. My stomach dropped. There was no way. I had played with Robby every weekend for months. "What do you mean?" "We play all the time," I said with tears welling in my eyes. It wasn't like my dad to play practical jokes. That was my uncle's thing. And this was NOT? Joke? Robby was as real and as solid as I was, had a voice as real as my own. My dad went on to explain that the boy I knew as Robby, the boy I had caught lightning bugs with, had told about my pet cats and my school bully, had met every single Friday at my gate, had drowned a few summers ago on a trip to the lake with his family. After he passed, his mom and dad were never the same and ultimately ended up divorcing. That was why she had moved next door. Was my childhood so rough that my brain was projecting images of little kids to make me feel less alone and misunderstood? But then, how was I able to touch him? How was he able to touch me? I'd like to think I've made peace with most of it, Although even now, 17 years later, I can't shake the feeling that it was real. If I close my eyes now, I can still see him, clear as day. His sweaty blonde hair pushed out of his tanned face.